The universe was vast and filled with wonders, but also with dangers that no one dared to face willingly. In a remote corner of space, a colossal alien warship floated lifelessly, its once magnificent hull scorched and broken. The ship, the Valorian Pride, carried Queen Valyria, ruler of the Scytheran Empire, a proud and advanced race whose power was now reduced to ashes in the aftermath of an ambush by hostile factions. Valyria sat on her throne in the dimly lit command chamber, her usual regal composure now mixed with exhaustion and worry. Her people were on the brink of death. Life support systems were failing, and the ship's reactor was dangerously unstable. They had sent out a distress signal hours ago, but the responses so far were discouraging. One reply stood out: silence. Every nearby civilization had either ignored the call or outright refused to help. No one wanted to risk angering the factions hunting Valyria. Her enemies had painted her as a threat, and aiding her would be seen as an act of defiance against them. Her most loyal advisor, Commander Kale, stepped forward. "My queen, perhaps we should conserve our energy. It seems no one will come." Valyria clenched her fists, her voice firm despite the fatigue. "No, someone out there must answer. We cannot give up. I will not let my people perish." Far away on a small orbital repair station near a mining colony, Ethan Carter was adjusting a plasma conduit on an old cargo freighter. A skilled technician with an unshakable sense of curiosity, Ethan had spent years repairing ships from every corner of the galaxy. He was known for taking on challenges others avoided, and his makeshift solutions often outperformed even the most advanced repairs. As he finished his task, a soft beeping noise caught his attention. He turned to see a flashing notification on his comms console, an incoming distress signal. Curious, Ethan put down his tools and tapped the console. The holographic display showed a garbled image of a Scytheran symbol, accompanied by a voice message. The translator kicked in. "This is Queen Valyria of the Scytheran Empire. Our ship is critically damaged. We request immediate assistance. Please, whoever receives this, help us. Lives are at stake." Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised. A Scytheran ship. That wasn't something you encountered every day. Stories of their advanced technology and imposing culture were common in the galaxy, but so were tales of their pride and arrogance. Helping a stranded alien queen wasn't exactly on Ethan's to-do list. He glanced at the station's other mechanics, who had also received the message. One of them, a burly man named Greg, shook his head. "No way I'm touching that. You know what happens if you mess with Scytherans? They'll blame you if something goes wrong. Not worth it." "Yeah," another chimed in. "Besides, do you really want to get caught in their politics? Let someone else handle it." Ethan frowned, staring at the hologram. It wasn't in his nature to walk away from someone in need. Sure, helping the Scytherans could be risky, but wasn't that part of what made life interesting? And if their ship was as advanced as people claimed, fixing it would be the ultimate test of his skills. With a smirk, Ethan made his decision. "I'm going," he said, grabbing his toolkit. Greg laughed incredulously. "You're serious? You're gonna risk your neck for a bunch of aliens who probably don't even think we're worth their time?" Ethan shrugged. "Maybe. But I don't like the idea of sitting here while someone's out there begging for help. Besides, who knows? It might be fun." Hours later, Ethan's small repair shuttle approached the massive damaged ship. As he got closer, he whistled in awe. Even in its broken state, the Scytheran vessel was an architectural marvel, its sleek design blending organic curves with intricate metallic patterns. He sent a signal to announce his arrival. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a deep, commanding voice responded. "Human vessel, state your purpose." Ethan grinned. "I'm here to fix your ship. Got your distress signal. Let me take a look and see what I can do." There was a pause, followed by a different voice, this one softer but filled with authority. "This is Queen Valyria. You're human. You're the only one who answered our call. Looks like it, Ethan replied casually. You don't have many options right now, so how about you let me help before things get worse? Valeria hesitated. The idea of relying on a human, one of the galaxy's less advanced species, was almost unthinkable, but the desperation in her heart outweighed her doubts. Very well, she said at last, but know this, if you fail, it will not only cost your life, but ours as well. Ethan smirked, guiding his shuttle toward the docking bay. No pressure, right? Let's get to work. And so began an unlikely alliance, forged in the void of space, between a human technician and a proud alien queen. Neither of them knew it yet, but this partnership would change their lives, and perhaps the galaxy, forever. Ethan's shuttle docked with the HFY warship with a soft, metallic hiss. The moment the airlock sealed, a wave of cold tension washed over him. He had no idea what to expect from the HFYs, but the silence in the docking bay felt heavy, like 1,000 eyes were watching his every move. He stepped out of his shuttle, toolkit in hand, and immediately noticed the difference. The walls of the ship gleamed with an otherworldly glow, their surfaces smooth, and yet somehow organic, like something alive. The dim lighting cast long shadows, making the interior seem more like a vast, ancient cathedral than a warship. A group of Scytheran soldiers stood at attention near the entrance. Their bodies were slender but well-muscled, their movements swift and precise. They wore uniforms adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to shift as they moved, glowing faintly in the low light. Their faces, though humanoid, carried an unsettling beauty, sharp features and eyes that seemed to pierce right through him. Human, one of the soldiers said with a cold, emotionless voice. You are the one who offered to repair the Queen's ship. Ethan nodded. That's right. I'm here to help. I need to see the ship's systems and start working on repairs. The soldier's eyes narrowed. The Queen has allowed you to board, but be warned. You are an outsider here. Do not think for one moment that your presence is tolerated. Ethan raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He had heard enough about the Scytheran's prideful nature to know that they wouldn't make him feel welcome. Still, he wasn't here to make friends. He was here to fix the ship. Before he could respond, the doors to the command room slid open, and a regal figure emerged. Queen Valeria. She was tall and graceful, with skin the color of polished obsidian. Her long silver hair cascaded down her back, and her eyes, dark and intense, glowed faintly as they locked onto Ethan. Despite her beauty, there was an air of command about her, a presence that made the room seem smaller, more confined. Human, she said, her voice low but commanding. I did not expect to see you in person so soon. Ethan straightened up and offered a polite smile, though he could tell she wasn't exactly pleased to see him. I've heard a lot about the Scytherans. Your ship's in rough shape, but I think I can help. Valeria regarded him for a moment, her expression unreadable. You are the only one who responded to our call for help. You must be quite brave or foolish. Ethan shrugged, trying to keep the conversation light. Maybe a little of both, but I don't like leaving people stranded, especially if I can fix it. There was a flicker of something, respect, perhaps, in Valeria's eyes before she turned and gestured for him to follow her. Come with me, human. I will show you the damage. The walk to the command center felt like an eternity. The ship's hallways were sleek, almost too perfect, and every step echoed in the stillness. Ethan couldn't help but marvel at the technology around him, even in its damaged state. The walls were alive with strange energy patterns, and the floors seemed to hum softly beneath his feet. Valeria led him to a large control room at the heart of the ship. Screens flickered with unstable data, and warning alarms beeped sporadically. The central console, once a masterpiece of Scytheran engineering, was barely functional, sparking and glitching as if struggling to keep the ship's systems alive. Ethan set his toolkit down on a nearby table and immediately began assessing the damage. It was worse than he had imagined. The reactor was unstable, and most of the power grids were offline. The life support systems were hanging by a thread. But the worst part was the damage to the main engine. "Your ship is in bad shape," Ethan said as he worked, his hands moving quickly as he ran diagnostic tools over the control panels. "I'll need access to your engineering bay and reactor. Everything has to be synchronized, or we're not going to make it." Valeria stood silent for a moment before replying. "Our engineers are not capable of fixing this. They have failed me." Ethan glanced up, sensing a shift in her tone. There was something beneath her words, regret, perhaps, or frustration. He had expected her to be cold, but there was a subtle vulnerability there. "Don't worry," Ethan said, focusing on the readout from one of the panels. "I can do this. I'll get everything back in order. But I'll need complete access to your systems." Valeria's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, Ethan saw something other than the fierce queen, the ruler who had fought so hard for her people's survival. He saw a leader who was willing to put her trust in an outsider. "You have one chance to save us," she said, her voice steady. "If you fail, none of us will survive this." Ethan nodded, not one to back down from a challenge. "I'll do my best. You're not alone in this, Your Majesty." And so, the two of them, one a human technician and the other a proud alien queen, began working together, each understanding that their fates were now intertwined. The ship, once a symbol of Scytheran might, was now at the mercy of a single human's hands. And as Ethan worked, the weight of the task before him became more clear. This wasn't just about fixing a ship. It was about saving an entire people. The ship was silent except for the hum of failing systems and the occasional beep of an alert. Ethan worked tirelessly, his hands moving across control panels, calibrating, adjusting, and rerouting power where he could. Despite the vast differences between him and the Scytherans, he felt a strange sense of purpose in this task. The Queen's people depended on him, and failure wasn't an option. As he moved through the ship's corridors, Valeria followed closely behind, her sharp eyes tracking his every movement. She had never trusted humans, and even now, she was unsure whether bringing him aboard had been the right decision. The crew of her ship had always seen humans as weak and unworthy of attention. Yet here was this one man, working without hesitation, with a focus that could rival the best of her engineers. "Do you truly believe you can fix it?" she asked, her voice carrying an edge of doubt. Ethan paused for a moment, looking back at her. "I don't believe in failure. I just need the right tools, access to the systems, and a little bit of luck. But if I do fail, I promise you I'll own it." Valeria's lips tightened, and she turned away from him, her expression unreadable. She knew she couldn't afford to let her guard down completely, but something about Ethan's determination intrigued her. As the hours passed, the repairs slowly began to take shape. The life support systems, once flickering dangerously, now hummed with a steady pulse. The lights grew brighter, casting away some of the shadows that had clung to the ship since the attack. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Yet the hardest task lay ahead. Ethan stood before the main reactor, examining the massive core that powered the entire ship. It had been damaged during the ambush, and its power was unstable, dangerously fluctuating. If he didn't stabilize it soon, the entire ship could implode. "Your reactor is the heart of this ship," Ethan said, his voice calm despite the rising tension in the room. "I need to get inside and do some work on the core itself. It's the only way to prevent a full meltdown." Valeria nodded, her expression serious. "You will have full access. Do what must be done." Ethan felt the weight of her words. It was one thing to have a technician's trust, but to earn the trust of a leader like Valeria, especially after the disdain her people had for humans, was something different. He knew he had to prove that trust wasn't misplaced. With a nod, Ethan donned his safety gear and made his way toward the reactor. As he entered the chamber, the temperature spiked, and the air seemed to thicken with the power emanating from the core. The energy crackled like a live wire, and the massive machine seemed to pulse with a mind of its own. Ethan's hand shook slightly as he connected the diagnostic tools. The data was a blur of numbers, flashing warnings, and unstable readings. The reactor was in a state of chaos. He had never seen anything like it before. He couldn't risk a single mistake. "You're certain this will work?" Valeria's voice echoed from the doorway. Ethan looked up, seeing her standing there, her posture straight and proud. He had never met a being so composed in the face of danger. But there was something else in her eyes, a flicker of fear. "I'm not sure, but I will give it everything I've got." Valeria stepped closer, her gaze fixed on him. "You are our last hope, human. If this fails—" She didn't finish the sentence. Ethan's focus returned to the reactor. With precise movements, he began rerouting power, bypassing the damaged circuits and realigning the core's energy flow. It was a delicate operation. One slip and the ship could be doomed. The pressure mounted as the reactor continued to pulse erratically. Sweat trickled down his forehead. But he didn't stop. Suddenly, a loud clank echoed through the chamber, and the power grid fluctuated again. Ethan's heart raced. He quickly adjusted the settings, his hands moving faster now. He had no room for error. In the silence of the room, he could feel Valeria's eyes on him. She didn't speak, but he could sense her quiet expectation. This was a test of his skill, of his resolve, and perhaps of his worthiness in her eyes. As the seconds ticked by, the reactor's pulse began to stabilize. The warnings on Ethan's screen began to disappear, replaced by steady green readings. A soft whirring noise filled the chamber as the core's energy settled into a safer range. The room grew quieter, and the tension in the air lessened. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow and let out a long breath. He stood up and turned to Valeria, his voice calm but tinged with exhaustion. "It's stable now. You're safe." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Valeria stood there, her expression unreadable as she looked at him. Then, slowly, she nodded. "You have done it," she said, her voice soft yet filled with a new sense of respect. "You have saved us, human." Ethan allowed himself a small smile. "No problem. Just doing my job." But inside, he knew that this moment had changed everything. The Scytherans, especially their queen, had seen something in him, a human, something that made them trust him. And though he had only fixed the reactor, he knew that this was just the beginning of what would be an extraordinary journey. The ship was saved, but the path ahead was still unknown. As the days passed, Ethan continued to work tirelessly aboard the Scytheran warship, his skills and determination slowly earning the respect of the crew. Though Valeria's trust in him had grown, the other members of her crew remained wary. They couldn't shake the feeling that a human, an outsider, should never have been allowed to work on their most sacred vessel. But despite their doubts, they couldn't deny the progress Ethan had made. The ship was coming back to life. The once darkened halls were now buzzing with the sounds of repair teams moving efficiently. Ethan had fixed the reactor, but there were still many systems to restore. Life support was fully operational, and the shields were now holding strong. Even the weapons systems were showing signs of recovery, though they weren't yet at full power. One afternoon, while Ethan was adjusting the weapons array, he felt someone approach. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Valeria had been observing him closely, always just a few steps behind, silently watching as he worked. "Ethan," she said, her voice smooth but carrying an undeniable authority. "You have done more than we expected. The ship is recovering, and I believe you have earned the right to know more about our mission." Ethan wiped his hands on a rag and turned to face her. "I'm just doing what I can. It's the least I can do after you've trusted me." Valeria nodded, her gaze steady. "You are the first human I've ever trusted, and it's not something I take lightly. But there are things I must share with you. You need to understand why we can't afford to fail." Ethan crossed his arms, intrigued. "What is it? What's the real reason behind all of this?" For the first time, Valeria looked hesitant. She glanced around, ensuring no one else was listening. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. The Exitherans have been at war for centuries. We have fought against many enemies, and we have always prevailed. But there is a new threat, one unlike any we faced before. They are called the Valkyrie, and they are relentless. They have destroyed entire planets, and now they are coming for us. Ethan's brow furrowed as he took in the information. And you think they'll reach Earth too? Valeria shook her head. No, the Valkyrie are not concerned with humans. But if they destroy our fleet, we will lose the power to defend the galaxy. Without us, your people could be at risk. Ethan understood now. This wasn't just about fixing the ship. It was about protecting more than just one species. It was about preserving the balance of power in the galaxy. If the Titherans fell, the ripple effect could reach every corner of the universe. We can't afford to fail, Valeria repeated, her voice quiet but urgent. And neither can you. We are linked now, Ethan. Your survival depends on ours. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, realizing the weight of the situation. It wasn't just the Excitheran Queen who was depending on him anymore. It was the entire galaxy. I'll do everything I can, he said finally, his voice steady. You have my word. The next few days were filled with hard work and long hours. But as time passed, Ethan began to feel a bond growing between him and the Exitherans. Valeria, though still distant and formal, had started to share more with him. Their conversations had shifted from mechanics to deeper topics about the history of the Excitheran people, the struggles they faced, and their hopes for the future. Ethan listened, absorbing every detail, his respect for her and her people deepening. One evening, as he was making his way to the engineering deck, he encountered one of the ship's officers, a tall Excitheran named Kale. Unlike the others, Kale had been somewhat more open to Ethan's presence from the start. You have earned the respect of many of the crew, Kale said, his tone unexpectedly friendly. Even if they don't admit it. Ethan smiled. I'm just doing my job. I never expected them to like me. But I can't deny it feels good to be trusted. Kale nodded. Trust is rare in our culture. And you've earned it in a way few outsiders ever will. Ethan was surprised by the officer's words. I never thought I'd be considered part of the crew, but it's nice to hear. I'm just trying to make sure we survive whatever comes next. Kale regarded him thoughtfully. I think you'll find that you have more allies than you realize. There are many of us who appreciate what you've done, even if we don't show it. Ethan felt a sense of camaraderie he hadn't expected. It was clear that not all Exitherans were rigid or hostile. Beneath their proud exterior, there were those who recognized his value and welcomed him as an ally. It was a small but important shift. Later that night, as Ethan worked late into the hours, the sound of footsteps approached once again. This time, it was Valeria. Ethan, she began, her voice softer than usual. I have been thinking. You've done much for us, more than I anticipated. But I need to ask you something. Ethan looked up from his tools, curiosity piqued. What is it? We are preparing for the final phase of repairs. The Valkyrie are drawing closer, and our fleet will soon need to move. But there's one thing left, an upgrade to the engines. I need your help with it. Without it, we won't be able to escape if the Valkyrie arrive early. Ethan's heart quickened. I can do that. We've got to get this ship ready, whatever it takes. Valeria nodded, a hint of gratitude in her eyes. We are fortunate to have you, Ethan. Not many would be willing to sacrifice so much for a people they barely know. Ethan smiled, though the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on his chest. The stakes had never been higher, and the path forward was uncertain. But one thing was clear. They were in this together. And no matter what came next, he would fight alongside them. The countdown had begun. The repairs were nearing completion, but there was still a sense of urgency hanging in the air. The Valkyrie were getting closer, and the Excitheran fleet needed to be at full strength. The final phase of repairs was underway, but Ethan felt the pressure building. This wasn't just about fixing the ship anymore. It was about survival. The entire galaxy depended on their success. Ethan sat in front of a terminal, his eyes focused on the schematics of the Scytheran warship's engine. He was preparing to implement the final upgrade to the engines that would give the ship enough power to outrun the Valkyrie if they attacked. It was a delicate procedure. One wrong move could mean disaster. As he adjusted the settings, he could hear footsteps behind him. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. Valeria had been a constant presence by his side since the beginning, always observing, always strategizing. "You're quiet today," Ethan said, not taking his eyes off the terminal. Valeria's voice was calm but firm. "There is little time left, Ethan. The Valkyrie are relentless. We cannot afford any mistakes." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had learned to respect the Scytheran Queen's ability to stay calm under pressure. But even she couldn't hide the sense of urgency that was spreading through the ship. "I know," he said, focusing on the final step of the upgrade. "I'm doing everything I can." Valeria placed a hand on his shoulder, a rare gesture of reassurance. "I trust you, more than anyone else aboard this ship." Ethan glanced up at her, meeting her steady gaze. "I won't let you down." With those words, he returned to his task. He entered the final commands, carefully adjusting the power conduits to ensure the engines would be able to handle the immense energy required. It was a risky move, but there was no other choice. As the console beeped, indicating that the process was complete, Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The upgrade had been successful. The engines were now ready. "Systems online," Ethan muttered to himself, turning away from the terminal. Valeria gave him a small, approving nod. "Good work." Before Ethan could respond, an alert sounded through the ship's intercom. "Incoming Valkyrie ships detected." The voice of the ship's communications officer echoed through the corridors. "They are closing in fast. Prepare for battle." Ethan's heart raced. This was it. The final test. The Valkyrie were here, and there was no time left to prepare further. They had to move. Now. "Ethan, come with me," Valeria ordered. She turned swiftly, her eyes hard with determination. "We need to get to the command deck." Ethan followed her, his steps quick as they made their way through the ship's corridors. The atmosphere had changed. What had been a calm, focused environment just moments ago was now filled with the tension of impending battle. Crew members rushed to their posts, preparing the weapons systems, while others began coordinating with the other ships in the fleet. Valeria led Ethan to the command deck, where the rest of her officers were gathered. Kale, the officer who had always been friendly toward Ethan, gave him a nod as they entered. "We're ready, Your Majesty," Kale reported, his voice steady despite the tense situation. "The fleet is mobilizing. All systems are go." Valeria nodded, her expression grim. "Good. Keep me updated on the Valkyrie's position. We're not backing down." Ethan stood at the back of the room, watching as Valeria took her place at the command console. She was calm and collected, every movement purposeful. It was clear to him now that she wasn't just a queen. She was a leader, someone who had earned the respect of her people and the trust of those around her. "Ethan," Valeria called over her shoulder, "I need you to stay here. If something happens to me, you're in charge of ensuring the ship gets away. You're the only one who knows the full extent of the repairs." Ethan's stomach twisted. "I'm not a leader, Valeria." "You are now," she said firmly. "This ship is your responsibility as much as it is mine. If we fail, it's not just my people who will fall. It will be yours too." Ethan swallowed hard. He had never considered himself a leader, but in this moment, he understood the gravity of her words. They were all in this together. If the ship went down, they all went down. The intercom crackled again. "Valkyrie ships are within firing range." Valeria didn't hesitate. She turned to her crew and issued orders, her voice calm but full of authority. The Scytheran ships began to maneuver, their weapons charging in preparation for the battle ahead. Ethan stood by, watching as the crew worked in perfect sync. Despite the chaos unfolding around him, he felt a sense of pride. He had helped make this possible. He had played a crucial part in ensuring the ship could defend itself. And now, it was time to see if it would be enough. The first shots rang out as the Valkyrie ships opened fire. The warship shuddered from the impact, but the shields held strong, just as Ethan had ensured. Valeria's command crew worked quickly to return fire, and the ship's engines roared to life, pushing them forward at full speed. Ethan watched, his heart pounding in his chest. The battle had begun. It was no longer just about fixing a ship. It was about survival. And now, they were all in the fight together. The battle raged outside the Titharan ship, as the Valkyrie fleet advanced with relentless precision. Ethan stood on the command deck, his hands shaking as he watched the chaos unfold. The warship shuddered with each blast, and the lights flickered as the shields absorbed the damage. Despite the turmoil, the ship's systems held strong. Thanks to the repairs, the crew had a fighting chance. Valeria's voice rang out with calm authority, cutting through the noise. Status report. Shields holding at 80%. Kale, the officer, responded. Weapons are fully operational. The Valkyrie are pushing us back, but we're dealing damage. Ethan couldn't help but notice how cool Valeria remained under pressure. She was the Titharan queen, but she had the heart of a warrior. Her presence in the midst of this battle inspired the crew. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for victory. We need to do more damage, Valeria said, her tone sharp. Target their command ship, take it out, and the rest will fall apart. Ethan felt a sense of pride in the Titharan queen. She wasn't just a ruler. She was a strategist, one who understood the true nature of war. But even with her brilliance, the odds were stacked against them. The Valkyrie were ruthless, and the enemy numbers were overwhelming. Ethan's mind raced as he scanned the ship's systems. The Valkyrie fleet was getting closer, and their firepower was intense. But Valeria's plan was clear. They had to strike hard and fast. Kale, Valeria barked, prepare the main cannon. Target the Valkyrie command ship. The officer didn't hesitate. Aye, Your Majesty. As Kale relayed the command, Ethan could feel the tension building. They had one shot at this. If they didn't destroy the Valkyrie command ship, the battle would turn against them. There was no room for error. Ethan's hands worked quickly across the console, making sure the cannon systems were properly aligned. He had helped repair the weapon, ensuring it could operate at full capacity. Now, it was time to see if his work would pay off. Target locked, Kale called out, his voice steady despite the growing intensity of the situation. Valeria nodded sharply. Fire when ready. Ethan held his breath as the powerful cannon hummed to life. The air seemed to thicken with anticipation. This was the moment that would decide the battle. With a burst of light, the cannon unleashed its full might. The blast shot through the space between the ships, colliding with the Valkyrie command ship. A brilliant explosion lit up the dark expanse of space, followed by a series of secondary blasts. The Valkyrie command ship was hit, and it began to break apart, its engines sparking and flickering out. Ethan couldn't help but exhale, his heart racing with the thrill of victory. It was a direct hit, and the Valkyrie flagship was destroyed. The battle was far from over, but the tide had shifted in their favor. Valeria didn't smile, though. There was no time for celebration. She turned quickly to her crew, issuing more orders. All ships, focus on the remaining Valkyrie vessels. We're not out of this yet. The Titharan fleet, now emboldened by their success, pressed forward. The Valkyrie ships began to retreat, their forces faltering without their command ship. But Valeria knew better than to think they were safe. The Valkyrie were cunning, and they would regroup. They would find a way to strike back. Ethan, Valeria called, turning to him as the battle continued to unfold. The ship is stable for now, but we need to prepare for a counterattack. Make sure the engines are at full power. We need to stay mobile. Ethan nodded, already moving toward the console. The repairs had worked, but he couldn't relax. There were still dangers to face. He had to ensure the ship's systems stayed online and that they had enough power to evade any further attacks. As he worked, he couldn't help but think back to the beginning of this journey. A few weeks ago, he had been just a technician, a human who had no idea what he was getting into. Now he was standing on the bridge of a warship, fighting alongside a queen and her people. He had done more than fix the ship. He had become part of something much bigger. Valeria's voice cut through his thoughts. "Ethan, I need you on the command deck. Now." He quickly made his way to the front of the room, where the battle was still raging. Valeria stood at the center, her eyes scanning the battle displays. "We've done well so far," Valeria said, her voice steady. "But there's something you need to know. The Valkyrie have a new weapon. We've detected a large energy signature on their remaining ships." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "It's a pulse cannon," Valeria explained. "One that could destroy our shields in a single shot. We need to be ready to counter it." The implications of this new weapon hit Ethan hard. They had already taken heavy damage from the Valkyrie, and a pulse cannon could destroy everything they had worked for. There was no choice but to fight with everything they had. He turned back to his station, his fingers moving quickly to assess the ship's energy reserves. They had to find a way to counter the pulse cannon. If they didn't, this could be the end. Valeria's eyes met his, filled with resolve. "We won't let them win, Ethan. Not today." And with those words, the battle continued, each moment bringing them closer to the final confrontation. The fate of the Zitharan people and humanity now rested in their hands. The battle had dragged on for hours, and the situation was growing more desperate. Ethan stood on the command deck, his eyes fixed on the rapidly advancing Valkyrie fleet. The energy readings coming from their ships were off the charts. He knew the pulse cannon was coming, and the stakes had never been higher. If the Valkyrie fired that weapon, it could obliterate the Zitharan ship in an instant. Valeria stood next to him, her posture unshaken despite the chaos. She had become more than just a leader to the crew. She was a symbol of resilience. Despite everything they had faced, she refused to back down. "Ethan, the pulse cannon is on the move." Valeria's voice was calm but firm. "I need you to find a way to protect this ship." He nodded quickly. "I'm on it." His mind raced as he analyzed the data in front of him. The pulse cannon was a powerful weapon, but he knew from his previous work on the ship that their shields had been improved. However, even the best technology had its limits, and the pulse cannon's energy signature told him that their shields would be overwhelmed in an instant. Then an idea struck him. It wasn't perfect, but it was the only shot they had. He began typing rapidly on the console, rerouting power from less essential systems to reinforce the shields. They needed every bit of energy to stand a chance. "Valeria, I've boosted the shield capacity," Ethan said, his voice tight with focus. "It won't last long, but it should hold long enough to survive the first blast." Valeria's eyes flicked to the battle display, then back to Ethan. "That will have to be enough. We need to take down that pulse cannon." Ethan glanced at the view screen. He could see the Valkyrie fleet surrounding them, the pulse cannon charging. He had to act fast. There was no time to waste. "Kale, ready the weapons," Valeria ordered. "Target their flagship. Take it down before the pulse cannon reaches us." The Zitharan officer gave a quick nod, already moving to implement the command. Ethan's fingers flew over the console as he worked to calibrate the ship's weapon systems. They were running out of time. "Energy levels are almost full," Kale reported. "We're ready to fire." "Fire," Valeria commanded, her voice unwavering. The ship's weapons hummed to life as the energy blast from their main cannon shot through the vastness of space, streaking toward the Valkyrie flagship. The Valkyrie ship tried to evade, but it was too late. The shot hit with a force that rocked the entire battlefield, and the Valkyrie flagship exploded in a brilliant flash of light. For a brief moment, there was a sense of triumph, but the Valkyrie were not done. The pulse cannon was still charging. Ethan's heart pounded as he watched the energy reading spike. He could feel the heat of the impending blast. "Valyria, it's coming. Get ready." The Valkyrie fired, and the pulse cannon shot out a beam of concentrated energy, aimed directly at the Scytheran ship. The shields began to flicker under the intense pressure, and Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "Hold on," Valyria shouted. With every ounce of strength, the shields held. The pulse cannon's beam collided with them, sending a shockwave that rattled the ship to its core. Ethan's console lit up with warnings, and the ship groaned as the energy reserves drained. It was holding, but just barely. And then, just as it seemed the shields would collapse, a second blast came from the Scytheran fleet. The remaining ships had targeted the Valkyrie cannons, and their return fire struck the pulse cannon directly. The beam wavered, and the Valkyrie ship began to lose power. Ethan didn't hesitate. He quickly rerouted the remaining energy into the ship's engines and weapons, sending the ship into a rapid evasive maneuver. The pulse cannon faltered, and with the final blow from their fleet, it went dark. The threat was neutralized. There was a moment of silence on the deck as the crew processed what had just happened. The Valkyrie fleet, once an overwhelming force, was now in retreat. The Scytheran ships had held strong, and they had won. Valyria turned to Ethan, her face breaking into a rare smile. "You did it, Ethan. You saved us." Ethan could hardly believe it. After all they had been through, it felt surreal. The ship was still standing. The battle was over, and they had won. But even as they celebrated their victory, Ethan knew this was just one chapter in a much larger story. The Valkyrie would regroup. They would come again. But for now, they had secured a moment of peace. As Valyria addressed the crew, thanking them for their bravery and sacrifices, Ethan couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. He had done something that, at the beginning of this journey, seemed impossible. He had not only repaired the ship but had helped lead it to victory. The crew had fought together, and in that unity, they had proven that, no matter the odds, they could triumph. And as the Scytheran fleet sailed off into the unknown, Ethan stood beside Valyria, knowing that their journey was far from over. The galaxy was vast, full of danger and uncertainty, but with their courage and determination, there was nothing they couldn't face.